is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. This is one of those where I learn new things every day, so I don't even have a joke. Stu Horvath.
Hi, Hambone. How are you?
I'm good. I'm impressed because this is a thing that I never thought existed. I never knew existed, and I'm excited about it. So why don't you tell our listeners what we're talking about today?
We are talking about Palace of the Vampire Queen. And you've never heard of that. No one's ever heard of that.
Never heard of it. Yeah. I mean, it's a vampire thing. I would have been way into it.
But it is a very important entry into role-playing game history. It is, in 1976, from We Warriors Productions.
Is that W-E or W-E-E?
W-E-E.
Oh, like little warriors. Little guys.
It is the first adventure module.
Really?
Yep. It's the first time that somebody put together an adventure dungeon crawl for somebody else to play as a publication that could be purchased publicly. Although, I mean, We Warriors didn't have distribution early on, so but when I say, available for purchase publicly, I mean out of the back of Peter Karastan's car.
Yeah, I was going to say, because normally when something is made compatible for the world's greatest role-playing game, you could kind of find it places.
This was a strange time. It's 1976, right? So, role-playing games exist for 2 years at this point. There's a little bit of confusion over what people want and what you can do with stuff. There's a whole period of time that if you try and use the world's greatest role-playing game system for anything, they would come down and sue you out of existence. This is sort of before that. The whole idea that you can't put Dungeons & Dragons on the cover of something because then you're using their trademark to profit, right? But everything else, it's free reign, right?
Yeah, definitely.
You can't copyright a system,
Yeah, and honestly, I guess maybe I could see back then, I mean, not the litigious nature of those parties involved. However, I guess maybe in 74 to 76, I could see the thought being, well, who in the hell would actually try to make something for our game? Who's even heard of our game at this point? You know what I mean?
And that's exactly it. They actually went one step further. TSR believed that nobody wanted to buy adventures or campaign settings for Dungeons & Dragons. That producing that material was a loser's bet. That there just wasn't a market for something that people could make up on their own.
Man, they must have been looking back at all the money that they did not make in those first few years going, oh, we blew it.
I love this fact. I love how huge a miscalculation this is on TSR's part early on. And of course, they still had the market share. They course corrected. But the first one that came out was Palace of the Vampire Queen. And eventually they got to the point where TSR saw it, TSR knew about it, and TSR eventually wound up distributing it by the end of 1976. It wasn't a long time, but it takes them a couple more years before they start producing their own modules. So earlier in 76, before Palace of the Vampire Queen comes out, Judges Guild has formed, and they went to TSR and tried to pitch them on producing play aids, which was a much bigger umbrella for them. It wasn't just adventures. It was, character sheets, charts, screens, stuff like that. And basically they got laughed out of the meeting. TSR was just like, no, that's crazy. If you want to do that, go for it. But good luck setting your money on fire. And so that they left. And then Judges Guild had some success with City State of the Invincible Overlord. And then, around the same time Palace of the Vampire Queen comes out, Palace of the Vampire Queen gets picked up by TSR for distro. And basically this is the moment where they sort of kind of realize that, oh, wow, there is money to be made here. But it takes them a couple years before they really get into the production with the Giants modules.
It's so unfathomable to me because it's knowing from the future looking back how much money TSR has made from modules, accessories, licensing the IP. I mean, let's not even think about licensing the IP yet, but let's look at just strict, this actually is for this specific game that we made. Here's a module, here's a DM screen, here's dice. Holy crap. Were they allergic to money or what?
Character sheets.
Yeah.
We Warriors, I believe, is also the producer of the first, commercially available character sheet booklet. I don't think there is a character sheet in the original white box. I think it's just like you were expected to just write that down on a piece of paper.
Oh, wow.
Crazy, right? Like, just astonishing. This is also my great ammunition for when I say that, like, Gygax and Arneson and TSR, back in the early days, yes, they gave us D&D, and yes, D&D is like the biggest and arguably, not the best, but it's like the biggest role-playing game, the one that everybody knows. But those guys weren't infallible because they really didn't have some sort of like godlike insight into role-playing games, because like they thought that adventure modules were dumb. Can you imagine?
I can't. And especially like the idea of a game coming out and not having a character sheet just blows my mind.
Yeah.
But to a degree that it shows kind of the intersection of like that lightning in a jar moment of creation where you're just trying to put it all out there and you've got like this seed of an idea that's rapidly blossoming. And the other side of it, which is, yeah, but this is good enough. We don't need to add the rest of the stuff because this is more than what the people need. And then another party comes along and says, oh my God, that's such a great idea, but why don't you have character sheets? Like, wow.
Yeah, and like this also goes to the idea that if you had to sum up 70s role-playing games, it was just everybody just trying to figure this stuff out. D&D comes out, it sets a brush fire, and there is wind carrying it everywhere, and all these people start getting in on it, and no one knows what they're doing. And it's a beautiful time because like there's no right or wrong answer, right? Like you could look at certain products and kind of see like the paths not taken and like how things could have developed differently if different things had caught on, or if people wanted different stuff, or if just like something came out at a different time. And like that's the awesome part about the 70s in terms of role-playing game development, because there was no rules. It was the Wild West, and like everybody was just like making stuff up on the fly. It was like pure Indiana Jones, like I make it up as I go.
Yeah, I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, and that is all of those little spore clouds exploding and turning into worlds like Chaosium and TSR. It's crazy that out of that, we are at a place in modern society where, like, when you're thinking of releasing a game, you have to have all these crazy, like, tiered ideas and plans and layers and, like, something for everybody, where then it was just like, holy crap, we're making a game!
And we're going to photocopy it!
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. When you think about the local store that had the only like photocopier in town back then, responsible for sailing 1,000 ships over time, millions at this point, like, wow.
And the fact that Palace of the Vampire Queen is the first module, it's sort of perfect because it's exactly what you expect from, a 1976 Dungeons and Dragons module. There's like no story to speak of. There's like a 1-page gloss on like the Vampire Queen. She comes to this island, and I think she's alive when she shows up at the island. The island's ruled by dwarves, and then she dies. She turns into a vamp, and none of it makes any sense, and none of it matters. The only thing that you really know is that she's kidnapped the dwarven princess, and that she has a taste for dwarven children.
Well, that's not at all creepy and terrible.
Yeah. But then, like, that's it. That's the only thing. Like, they don't even give you a description of what the palace looks like as you're riding up to it. Like, it's just like, it's in the mountains. Like, is it like a castle? Is it like white and gold? Or like, is it like luxurious? Is it like a dump? Like, I get nothing.
Yeah, I think back to the Warhammer episode we recently did when you had a moment where you're talking about lore can sometimes be too much lore.
Yeah.
I think they didn't have enough in this one, it sounds like.
That goes to like the idea that this is the very first one, so they had no idea what people really needed in the toolkit to like really kind of make the game come alive. Like, I like the term play aid, which I think is something that was used a lot in the 70s, and it has faded from our vocabulary when we talk about role-playing games. Like, I feel like that's what these things are for me. They're things that make my job as the ref easier, and like less work that I have to do means more time that we get to play, right? They wanted to support players and GMs, but they didn't know the best way to do it yet.
Well, also, let's be real about something here. Like, probably one of the main reasons why it did not endure was because it was called a play aid. There's nothing sexy sounding about that. Like, referee sounds a lot sexier than play aid.
True.
Or
yeah.
enticing. And especially when you get to, like, later on when you have role aids.
Oh, yeah.
And there's actually aids happening in the world. And it's just like, there's nothing that makes me be like, oh, man, I'm going to pull this off the shelf. Like, the word aids.
Aren't Rolaids like Tums? Like, isn't that antacid?
Yes, I was just about to get to that. It's an antacid as well. So it's like nothing about this like screams like cool fantasy setting and world. Like the thing I have to take every night before bed because I'm old and my little tum-tum is on fire. Anyway.
Yeah. The dungeon is actually pretty intricate. It's 5 levels. Whether they're above ground or below ground, it's never said. You just have to make that call. And they provide a player map and a GM map, which I think is pretty cool. And I feel like that happens a lot now in the modern day, and it happened early on here. But there's like 30 years in between where like they never produced player maps.
Oh, I miss a player map. I think that's a highly underutilized tool.
Yeah, totally. But basically the adventure is just like a list of like room numbers. It's like a spreadsheet. So room number 1, 3 goblins, max damage 432. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's their hit points or if that's, I don't know. And then contents of room, empty, 17 gold pieces on goblins. There's like hundreds of empty rooms. Like not just like empty rooms with monster in it, but totally empty. Rooms 27 through 33. There's no creatures encountered, and everything's empty. And there are rooms that detail what furniture there is in. So I think that these are literally rooms that have nothing in them.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like all killer, no filler to me. It sounds like a whole lot of, we have to give them more rooms, or otherwise they're not going to get a value out of this, but they're going to be bored as shit.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess like the idea is that maybe you could put your own stuff in there, but that's left unspoken. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense too. Like there's bandits in the first level, and like, okay, I get that. There's bandits in the first level of like the deserted castle. That's cool. But why are they sticking around when room 51 is the dining room and the table is set for dinner with 5 drained bandit bodies sitting around it? Like, if 5 of my buddies just got killed by a vampire or just missing, and I'm a cowardly bandit, I ain't sticking around. I'm getting the hell out of there.
Yeah.
You know? And then it starts to suffer from, like, we got to get all the cool monsters in. So there's, like, a gelatinous cube, a rust monster, carrion crawler. You know, I think there's a couple owl bears. There's a giant slug on just about every floor with no explanation as to why. It's just, like, that Madcap kind of, like, I just want to throw everything cool in this dungeon, castle, whatever it is, because I want my friends to fight it. Because it'll get like a pop at the table. Like there's no inner logic to it, which I find like super endearing. I need that inner order. I need it to make a certain kind of sense, even if it's a sense that doesn't make sense to other people. Like I would never be able to write this adventure, and it becomes like zany and madcap. Like you go into it, it's called Palace of the Vampire Queen, right? And as modern audience, we think, okay, this is going to be like Strahd's castle,
right?
And there's going to be like there's going to be an organization there that there's recognizable to horror fans who've watched movies, or maybe I've read Dracula. It's like, no, all of this is going to surprise the hell out of you because it doesn't make a lick of sense. It's just everything in the kitchen sink thrown at the wall. And like, I know you're supposed to throw shit and or bologna on the wall, but no, they're throwing kitchen sinks at the wall to see if they stick. It's just, it doesn't make any sense, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, there's something kind of special about that. I have to say, I'm a person who thrives on order. However, like there is something cool about, I mean, maybe not so much then because you didn't know what was happening. And maybe at that point then you just kind of, by not knowing what is supposed to happen in a module, you're just so much more able to go with it and just be in the moment.
Yeah.
Now looking back though, like knowing how we have to like kind of have the control, have like the order, have like the theme to it, like curating a dungeon is almost to me like making a mixtape for a girl you like, where like, you know, you need to have those right moments in there and know where the high spots are supposed to be. Whereas in this, it's kind of like refreshing in a way because as a player who has dealt with that through so many years of like very curated dungeons, going in there and being like, I don't know what's going to happen next because like I'm just waiting for like a black hole to open up and Bugs Bunny to pop out and say, did I make the wrong turn at Albuquerque? Because there is no rhyme or reason or sense to this dungeon. And that I think is kind of fun in its own way because it's so weird.
It is so weird. Dude, the last level, which is the one where the vampire queen lives. So she's smart enough to have like a decoy vampire queen. There's a lady vampire on the level who is in like a gold coffin, and it's just like, okay, yeah, like she's supposed to get killed by the adventurers, and they're, you know, like, and the vampire queen lives to fight another day. But at the same time as that is put into the adventure, room Room 24 on level 4 is the garlic garden.
What?
Garlic may be gathered and taken with the party. Like, there's a garden full of garlic plants. Like, what? In a vampire's castle? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? Like, I mean, as a player, I appreciate you throwing me the bone, but Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's 1976. There's been enough vampire movies where generally, by and large, everybody knows that garlic kills vampires. And so as the vampire queen, like, I can imagine, sure, lots of people are into botany. Lots of people love plants and like having gardens in their home and making it feel full of life, even though you're like a creature of the night. But I digress. Like, of all things to plant, why not nightshade? Wolfsbane, maybe. The actual thing that can kill you in a really easily grabbed area before they're supposed to actually come and kill you? What are they thinking?
And, like, they know that it's the palace of the vampire queen. Aren't they going to stock up on garlic before they come to the party? You know?
I mean, maybe they didn't have any in the local bodega on the island. You don't know. But, man, I sure as heck wouldn't have thought that they'd have a whole room designated to it in the castle.
Yeah. It's weird. And then there's other weird stuff. There's a whole bunch of werewolves that are polymorphed to look like ghouls. Like, why?
That's a flex. It's a choice.
And I just don't understand it. Like, and there's no explanation at all. It's just like, with 5 werewolves and in parentheses, look like ghouls. What? Like, what do you mean? Like, are they polymorphed? Do they have ghoul attack? Like, I don't understand. What do you mean when you say looks like ghouls?
It's a real head scratcher, man. So TSR eventually does put this out. What happens next? I mean, because I've clearly not heard of this until now, and I think I would remember a module like this.
I mean, basically, they put out 4 total products from We Warriors and distributed them. One was another adventure. One was maybe the start of a campaign setting, kind of sketching out an archipelago, maybe. I think the character sheets were actually the 4th thing. And this lasted for about a year and a half. I don't even think it was a year and a half. By the end of 1977, TSR just stopped distributing third-party products. This is obviously because they were gearing up to start producing their own modules. I mean, they did see how much We Warriors product they were moving, but it was really the success of Judges Guild in, providing players and GMs the stuff that they wanted to run their games. That was really the thing that made TSR leery about, not being in the market for adventures and stuff. And by 78, they were in the game, and they released We Warriors, and We Warriors kind of bounced around for a little bit longer. I don't honestly know a whole lot about the company. I know that it was a husband and wife team.
Aw, that's nice.
Which I think is interesting for the time. Yeah, Peter and Judy Karastan. And, after a couple of years, I think by 79, they were just gone. This is sort of interesting, too. The original copies, they weren't bound. It was just loose leaf.
Really?
Yeah. So, like, they're super rare because, like, it's just a stack of loose paper. Even, like, the outer covers were just single sheets. And apparently, if a print run made it to TSR and it was missing a page, they would just photocopy it. Like, there was no, it was easy to kind of, like, complete it. After TSR dropped them, they did get, like, a zine kind of format, which are also still super rare. Like, you can't find copies of this thing for less than like $1,000 out there. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not even like a sexy grand. Like, it's literally like one illustration on the cover, and the maps are pretty enough, but like there's nothing to this thing to like warrant the price. Like, it's not a beautiful object. It's a historical object that is obviously like just super scarce because it wasn't an object that was easy to keep intact.
Especially if it's been printed on loose leaf paper.
Yeah.
So, Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Palace of the Vampire Queen?
Yeah, I do. You can get it Precis, Precis Intermedia, pigames.net. They recently bought the rights to this and a bunch of other stuff, and they reprint them on the cheap. I think it costs like $8 with shipping to like get. I mean, it's nothing special. It's literally just like photocopy paper with like a parchment style photocopy cover. But it was a cheap and efficient way to get a piece of role-playing history in my hands. It's worth it. If I was running a long-term D&D campaign right now, I would totally slip this in somehow, like just to mess with y'all, But
you would omit the garlic room.
No, I would leave the garlic room. I would leave that just because I can't ascribe this kind of like guile to it because it's the first one, and I just think that people didn't know enough. But I do think that the more I think about it, the more I think that like putting like a room full of garlic in a vampire house is like the perfect mental screw job, you know? Like, you
right.
walk in, you know you're in a vampire house, and now you got a garden full of garlic. You're going to be like in that room for sessions, like weeks of real time trying to figure out like, why is this here? It's going to make you crazy, right? Because it doesn't make any sense. So it's got to be a trick, but you need to know before you can proceed.
And that, my friends, is half the fun of playing role-playing games.
Yep.
The complete and utter bonkerishness of the whole ordeal. Well, this was another awesome episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at VintageRPG. Every day I'm posting stuff like Palace of the Vampire Queen and other things. Role-playing stuff. Toys, games, dice sometimes. I don't know. Just you follow me already. Come on.
He makes a fair point, folks. You can find me on the Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about board games. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons. You can also find my day-to-day adventures on podcasting and in life over on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. If you like the podcast, don't be shy about stopping over to our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got early release episodes. We've got behind-the-scenes looks at Stu's book and my game that are coming out next year. We've also got a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. So patreon.com/vintagerpg. And also, while you're at it, don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast because your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.